thanks for that, Tim. Most appreciated. Now, for those who can see, hopefully you can see my not so lovely face in the corner somewhere, and hopefully it won't be too distracting. At any rate, I will go through the show, and I look forward to receiving as many curly questions as you could possibly muster. I love the curly ones, so please don't be shy. And without any further ado, we shall go ahead with this very interesting topic called the IT Neighbours and Compliance Tsunami, a wipeout or benefit for IT. It's very topical, considering we just have a very new standard that has just come out, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Let me also state that I am part of a consortium called the Perfect Storm Consortium, which is made up of a group of us, very eminent people, including William Emke and John Woolston. And together we have come up with another series which you'll be able to see in due course, and we've run a number of seminars on this called, again, the Perfect Storm Consortium, and in fact you can see us on LinkedIn as well. As part of that, we have determined a number of villains against the corporate bottom line, and my focus today is on villain 3, and it's 3 of the 4 major villains, and this is called facilities and governance, and it's all around the regulatory requirements in IT and what's coming and what is to come and what is here very recently. So let's start with neighbours, and it's not neighbours as in the TV show or the neighbour next door, but rather the National Built Environment Rating System, which was a system developed by the New South Wales Department of Environment and Heritage about 10 years ago for buildings. So you may have driven past or walked past a building that says 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star. Well, that was developed by that body, and it is now compulsory on a national basis. So if you're a prospective tenant and you want to lease 2,000 square metres or more, by law, you have to get what's called commercial building disclosure. And that incorporates a neighbours rating. And a neighbours rating basically gives the level of efficiency of the building. It is not a design standard like Green Star. Green Star is where the design is prepared, and on paper the building is so many stars. What neighbours does is it looks at the previous 12 months in practicality and says, how efficient really were you? And so that's why you can see 2-star, 3-star, run up to 6 stars. So, and if a government organisation wants to take up space, they want 4.5 stars minimum. Otherwise they won't take residency in a building. So you can see they've raised the bar fairly high. So now, this year, February, the new data centre rating and IT workload rating was introduced by neighbours, or the New South Wales Department of Environment and Heritage. It is a national standard, it is not just a New South Wales standard. And in fact, I was fortunate enough to be on the first batch of assessors, and we are out now rating data centres as we speak. And the beauty about this is it does a whole lot of things in terms of keeping apples for apples, etc. And I'll go into more detail in a moment. But what neighbours does is currently it does look at hotels, it looks at buildings, it looks at offices, and now recently, as I said, data centres and IT. And as I said, Green Star looks at the design standard, and neighbours looks at the reality, the practical standard. So why was this developed? Why do we need a data centre rating? Well, up to now, I'm sure you have seen people will put up their hands and say, we've got a PUE of 1.5, or we've got a PUE of 2, and the problem there is just say, okay, well, how did we come up with this PUE, power usage effectiveness, which is basically the IT workload and the total consumption of the facility. So it's basically the facility consumption in total over whatever the IT workload is. So at the end of the day, we haven't had apples for apples. This is the problem, because somebody might have done a measurement at a particular point in time in winter, or at a point in time as a one-off, whereas the true measure is to take the average over 12 months, 24/7, because you're taking all seasons, you're taking all occurrences, and you get the average over the 12-month period, and that is the best way. But then, of course, where do you measure it, how do you measure it? And NABERS now brings this in to a common standard, so we can now actually compare apples to apples. The other thing is there are a lot of computer rooms in office buildings. A data centre to NABERS is 10 kilowatts of heat load, which is really anywhere from 3 to 5 racks. It's nothing. So up to now, if an office building has had a computer room with 5, 6 or 10 racks, and that computer room did not serve the staff of that building, and that computer room was exempt, did not count at all. So there was in fact a loophole. That loophole has now been shut, and that office, or that computer room, well, will eventually need to be measured. Now, it is not compulsory at this point in time, but it will get there. Now, what is the impact on government policy with this? Well, basically, up to now, governments tend to buy from organisations that adhere to certain standards. So just like government will only occupy a 4.5-star rated office building, you will soon find out that if you're dealing with government, there'll be some more impacts happening for those organisations. Anyway, let us now move to the common vernacular, and I've explained some of this already. But these are the ratings that we now have from NABERS. And that is, we have a data centre infrastructure rating, we have an IT workload rating, and we have a whole data centre rating. And a whole data centre rating includes everything. And that is typically for a company that owns the whole facility. But then we have a lot of co-location providers, such as Metronome, DRT, NextDC, Equinix, Global Switch, etc., etc. It's a whole host of them. And then we have the vernacular power usage effectiveness, which I've explained, and we have the IT workload. Now, the IT workload is based on 2 major criteria. One is not CPUs, but the number of cores. So a CPU may have 4, 8 cores, and now some are coming up with 16 cores. And then we have the other being the amount of capacity, of disk storage capacity. So they're the 2 major ingredients in terms of the IT workload rating. It is relatively crude, but it's a start. And in fact, it is the first on the planet, to my understanding, that is of a government standard. So I must admit the New South Wales Department of Environment and Heritage have come up with something very good. I don't often give government departments a pat on the back, but I think they've come up with a world first on this one. So hats off to those guys. Now, the star ratings are pretty much measured in CO2 emissions. That's basically how it comes. That's how NABERS is based. And in fact, the rating comes in 2 formats. One, if you're buying green power, that means your CO2 emissions are reduced, so you get a better rating. 2, the rating still states what are the emissions if you didn't purchase green power. So then to say, well, whether it's solar power, whether it's tri-generation or quad generation, or whether you're even using waste to energy on site like biomass, then of course the two numbers will become the same, and that will become more interesting. And there'll be more of that as time goes on. Okay, now how's this going to impact business decisions? This gets interesting. We're starting to get to the meat of this discussion, and I'll elaborate on this. Okay, local compliance, compulsion. Now, I've explained briefly that with buildings we now have compulsion. It took several years because the NABERS standard was new, and it took a long time to tweak and develop, and over the years they have developed it to quite a significant point, and it is a standard. And other countries, in fact, I believe, are looking at it as a standard in the region and to adopt it because it is so well developed. Now, we have to say, how long is it going to take before this becomes compulsory? I can't answer that question. I can give my opinion and my view on what I think will happen, and if you were to ask me, well, if and when, well, I'll certainly say it's not an if, it is a when. In what format as to how it will become compulsory, that I can't say. It could be in a number of forms, just like with commercial building disclosure, or like, you know, what's the minimum that government will take, like 4.5 stars for an office building. So we can come up with a number of possibilities that could happen. I would suggest that we'd be looking at somewhere between 2 and 3 years away, is my guess in terms of any form of compulsion. Certainly, in terms of other areas, we will see more requirements come through. Global compliance. Now, this is indeed the thin edge of the wedge, and you can see here there's a new ISO standard that is being developed as we speak, and it's a thing called SC39, Standards Committee 39. It's being pushed out of Europe and the USA, and it closely relates to some Japanese standards, which comes from the JP39 in the IT space, and it covers a whole range of things, including data centres, including how IT is utilised, how servers are utilised, applications, a whole lot of things. So might be 1 year, 2 years by the time this has been fully developed, but it is being developed as we speak. And it's a global standard. So in fact what we have with NABERS now is a forerunner. So they're in fact leading the world with this. The ISO standard will be far more detailed, and will certainly be much more stringent in its application, in its detail, and so forth. So watch out. I would rather be at the leading edge of this and be proactive in preparing the way for this new ISO standard, a la NABERS, than waiting for it to hit, because the cost of trying to do it all at once is just going to be absolutely astronomical. And I think, like most organisations, we would rather do it in a more cost-effective manner. Okay, corporate governance and citizenship. People say, okay, well, I'm trying to keep my costs down, I can't afford to be too generous. Being a good corporate citizen can sometimes cost money, and so forth. Well, there's two ways of looking at that. That is the first way of looking at it. And the other way is to say, well, if we're leading the way, or we're amongst the thought leaders, and we can move ahead while the costs are not too astronomical, and do some very proactive things without it costing an arm and a leg, and then I'm gaining good corporate governance, I'm addressing the future global governance requirements in advance with some of the world-leading indicators like NABERS, and then being a good corporate citizen and declaring, well, you know, we're 5-star NABERS certified for our IT and for our data centres. And most tenders today, from government departments, from corporates even, are saying, what are you doing to become, both from a governance perspective, but also from a good corporate citizen, and from a sustainability perspective, what are you doing? Well, certainly a lot of brownie points can be gained right here by saying, well, we're actually doing this, and when you do this ahead of time, it actually costs less. Because when suddenly it becomes a requirement, and then the mainstream see, oh, help, I've got to require it to be standard, to meet the new ISO standards. Otherwise, I'm going to have a hard time meeting these tender requirements. And then everyone goes at once trying to get it all done. Well, guess what? The old law of supply and demand. You're going to pay double or triple what you could have paid for earlier on. So there's a number of good economic reasons to proceed ahead in advance. Then we have engagement with the market. Strategic procurement, state and federal government tenders, and again, I think I've probably jumped ahead on this one and stated some of these things about the government tenders, corporate tenders out there for various products and services, and again, by stating that, oh, look, we're meeting the new NABERS standard, we've gone ahead, we've just got a NABERS rating, we're in the first 100 companies to get a NABERS data centre and IT workload rating, and even if we achieved a 3.5-star rating, we are now moving ahead and undergoing a full audit and internal refurb and upgrade to meet a 5-star standard. Well, you're going to be one of the leaders, even if you don't have a great star rating initially, but the fact that you've identified where you're at and then you're moving ahead with plans to meet a much higher standard, well, you're well ahead of the pack already, even if you're not at a high star rating initially. But it just shows that you're being proactive. And companies who don't just use it as a tick the box, but who care, will give you a lot of brownie points for that, and will put you ahead of the pack in your bid for whatever products and services you intend to pursue. Okay, now, the remedy. Now, there's an old adage that says you can't manage what you don't know. And so measure, 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 a bit like when you buy property, location, location, location. And I can't stress this highly enough. I have started looking and doing some NABERS ratings for data centres, and I tell you what, it is an absolute nightmare in terms of trying to work out what needs to be monitored exactly where to get the right numbers. Up to now, most CIOs have not been aware of how much their energy consumption has been costing. Why? Because they haven't been gold on their energy costs. They're gold on their infrastructure costs, hardware, software, etc., staffing costs, all of those things, but not energy. Oh, properties handle that. Facilities handle that. That's their problem. But that's not going to work. That has to change, and it is changing, but it's going to change at a faster pace. So therefore, we need to measure what we are consuming and what functions are consuming which. So how much is the IT consuming? So ideally, we've got measures at every rack. Ideally, we're measuring at the output of each PDU. That is the PDUs from the after the UPSs. And we're accurately taking these in, measuring even separately the lighting, measuring the HVAC, measuring your losses, measuring absolutely everything. So then we can better understand where the energy is being used and where the inefficiencies are and how we can better remediate those things. So when we do an audit, first thing we do is we've got to take measurements and we've got to verify that the measurements are actually correct. In other words, how accurate are the meters that are there? And that's what NABERS does as well. They've got a very stringent set of requirements, which is quite appropriate, to make sure that we determine the validity of the existing meters, that they are accurate to within a certain degree. So measure, measure, measure. That I cannot stress highly enough. And when we're finished what we're doing, the measures must be there permanently, and good monitoring software, good DCIM software, with a nice dashboard that is practical, not just nice, that can be utilised and checked to see where things are at in real time, and then of course measured in terms of trending. Then we have audits. So as I said, the measuring is number one, but then going through to a full audit stage is absolutely a must. So what I tend to recommend is going through both a NABERS audit and what I call a level 3 audit, and currently we have the AS 3598 2000 standard, although there's a level 1, 2 and 3. That has been changed as we speak. I like to go to the most stringent standard, so I go right up to a level 3 and then do this in conjunction with an EU Code of Conduct and use the standards out of that, because that's far more specific to IT, and as a combination of that, these are very detailed audits. There are also other preliminary audits that can be done, and again, we have others within the Perfect Storm Consortium that provide more preliminary audits, so you don't have to go to the huge expense of going through these major audits, which are much larger and at a higher cost. But the beauty with these audits too is that they come up with a bunch of solutions, both with the low-hanging fruit and also the heavy lifting. So typically we can achieve return on investments of anywhere between 1 and 3 years. If we go over 3 years, even on a major refurb, including all your crack units and HVAC and power and everything else, it's not a good comeback. Dollars have to stack up, and that is very important. Sustainability can actually be highly profitable if it is done the right way. So audits to standards are extremely important, because the standards ensure that it's not just a finger in the air type audit and say, oh, well, yeah, we can come and do a bit of this and we can do a bit of that. But yeah, to what standard? What are we going to achieve? At the end of the day, results speak louder than words. And the last item there you can see is act, act, act. A lot of people talk, a lot of people do the odd little audit here and there, and they say, oh gee, you know, one of our crack units is not working well, or our chiller is getting old, we better change it. So they do this band-aid thing to remediate, and they say, oh look, these other things will work for another 5 years, we can get that out, and, you know, no need to change it. But what they don't understand is the operating cost is so high, they can't afford not to change the whole thing. So by looking at the requirements holistically and doing a far bigger refurb, your ROI actually becomes better, because then your OpEx goes down by, say, 50%. Instead of doing this little band-aid approach that helps reduce your OpEx by 10%, then the numbers kind of stack up a lot better. So there's no reason. And if you don't have a CapEx budget, there's still no excuse, because money can be provided in a whole OpEx type arrangement, and you can still be well ahead on day one and have reduced costs even after all your lease payments and everything else. So there is no excuse not to act. So let's act, act, act. That again is a must. A lot of people talk. Talk is very cheap these days, but again, the corporate bottom line is an absolute must. Corporate governance is a must, and the new standards that are coming in is an absolute must. So why wait? If you wait, the consequences will be dire, because what's going to happen is you are going to miss out on more tenders, whether it's corporate or government. Government will lead the way, all the states and the federal government, because this NABERS standard is federally adopted and is national. So it's not restricted to New South Wales, it's a national requirement. So at the end of the day, save yourselves a big tsunami. Don't be overthrown by this. I have a vision of that movie, Perfect Storm, where the boat goes up this huge wave. You know, it looks like it's a few hundred feet high, and except it doesn't make it, unfortunately. Don't get overthrown by the tsunami. Lead it. Go ahead and save yourself a lot of pain, and save yourself a lot of money. The corporate bottom line, it can be kept very healthy, and you can lead the pack very easily, and it doesn't cost a lot. That is the benefit. So what I intend to do now is hand over and try and answer a bunch of your questions. So please, curly questions are most welcome, and I'll be more than happy to answer. So please don't be shy and ask right ahead.
Very much for that wonderful presentation. Bob is correct. We will now commence the Q&A portion of our live speaker session for today. If you do have any questions for Bob that you'd like to ask about his presentation, his work with the Perfect Storm Consortium, or his experiences in green IT, then please do submit your questions now in the questions box in the webinar control panel. Bob will address each question in turn, and please do remember, if you would like to speak with Bob or a representative of the Foundation for IT Sustainability, please feel free to email info@FITS, that's ffits.org, at any time following this session, and we'd be more than happy to assist your query. So now for the questions. So the first question we have for you, Bob, is what impact do you think this will have when dealing and selling to government, state and federal?
Okay, good question. It will have a significant impact, but like most scenarios, different departments will take this up and will incorporate this within their various tender processes. So what will happen is there will be a part of the requirements box under governance that will say, even though it's not compulsory, further weight will be added to those that have a NABERS rating for data centre infrastructure and or IT workload. And so that will give you more brownie points if you have one, even if at this early stage you say, we are planning to undertake this within the next 3 months. We are preparing and arranging the assessment to be done. That will even help. And then over time, of course, the better the number, the better you will be. So that will happen pretty much immediately. Some government departments will go with this quicker than others, but it will spread to every government department around the country, state and federal. And then you will see it taken up by the corporate sector as well. But it'll be initially dealt with brownie points because it is not compulsory, but when it does go compulsory, as I said, it's my opinion that it might be 2 years, 3 years, but somewhere down that path we will see that. But now, if you want to gain brownie points in winning a tender, that will certainly help. So that will be the initial impact.
I have a question. Are there different types of NABERS data center ratings, and how do data centers know which rating that they require?
Okay, basically, if they're a co-location facility, they don't need to worry about getting an IT workload rating. They just need to get a data center infrastructure rating because it's the tenants who control the IT equipment. And then if there are tenants inside those facilities, then they'll be wanting to get an IT workload rating. If it's a company-owned facility and they own everything, well, obviously they'll be looking to get a whole data center rating which incorporates both. And so initially, the fact that you're getting a rating will already be a plus, regardless of what the numbers are. But then as more and more organisations get their ratings, of course, people will be looking to the better numbers. And the system basically goes from 3-star is considered the median, and that translates in terms of PUE to about a 1.81. And then a 6-star is the maximum. So it's the same as buildings. Buildings go to 6, so does this.
Thanks, Bob.
So I hope that answers the question.
The next question is, where do you see the next big growth and maturity areas for green ICT?
That's a very good question. Actually, a mate of mine was just up at the Uptime Institute in the US last couple of weeks, and they heard the CTO for Microsoft speak, and my thinking was very much along the same lines, where people are taking out and improving their efficiencies in data centers so much. There's only so much left to be done. And so the new area to be explored is the application layer. So let me give you a brief example of this. You can have buildings structured on solid foundations or weak foundations. When an earthquake hits, the buildings on the weak foundations, of course, collapse first. Now, when we talk about huge SAP ERP applications or very large Oracle or SQL database applications, these things chop through a lot of CPU cycles. Now, can you imagine if you reconstruct those applications in a more efficient manner in the way that the CPU will be used, then you can save a lot of cycles. And if you're going to save a lot of cycles, so if you rebuild or reconstruct your application and hypothetically you save 50%, well, can you imagine the effect that you're going to have downstream all the way through? It's massive. So this is an area that we're getting very much involved with in looking at these applications and basically how efficient they are and how they can be rewritten to save a lot of energy. So this is where things are going to be heading in the next several years, without doubt.
Great, thanks, Bob. The next question is, what is the minimum size of a data center that can be rated? Is there a size that's too small to be considered necessary to be rated?
Another good question. 2 parts to that. I think there is nothing too small to be rated, except that in terms of NABERS, the NABERS rating requires a minimum of 10 kilowatt heat load and a separate air conditioning system supplied to it to be declared as a data center. That includes separate storage and a separate servers. If you have those, then it is a data center. So in terms of governance and in terms of meeting standards, it will have to be, well, it should be rated. Now, in terms of a practicality situation, that's another story. I mean, if it didn't need to be, you could still have it looked at and try to be made more efficient using the standard measures of PUE and everything else. But I would highly recommend that it would be rated, again, for all the other reasons that I've described. So typically that translates to somewhere between 3 and 5 racks is a data center. I mean, I'll call that a computer room rather than a data center, but that's how NABERS defines it.
Bob, what do you think the longer term implications will be to your bottom line?
Okay, well, it'll be huge because power costs are going up. CEOs and CFOs will start to apportion, as they see what's going on here, the responsibility of energy to the CIOs and the CTOs. So what will happen once these senior managers and officers start taking responsibility for energy and realising how much money can be saved, even in terms of end computing, whether they're zero client computing, better levels of virtualization, all sorts of things, better types of networking and how the collaboration process is done within organisations. I think we will see that the bottom line will be greatly enhanced. So there is a lot of room to move without the need of sacking people to dramatically reduce the corporate bottom line. So I think we're going to see some very major positive impacts to the corporate bottom line for those that take advantage of it. For those that are of the old school, unfortunately, they're going to lose. Simple as that.
Could you perhaps tell us how is the NABERS infrastructure rating different to, say, the PUE assessment? I know you touched on it in your presentation, so maybe you could just elaborate on the big differences between the two.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there are basically it closely relates to the standard of the PUE 3, which is where it is measured on an average basis over a 12-month period. So it is probably 95% PUE based, and as I said, the median is a PUE of 1.81, and it's not only the median in Australia, it's pretty much a global median actually, and that provides a rating of 3 stars. The only differential here is it does take some influence of the geography. So is it in Sydney, is it in Melbourne, is it in Darwin, for example? There is a small deviation for the geographic location, but it's only very minor. So it is very much closely related to PUE, but measured over the 12-month average. Over that period, of course, we don't count things like Power over Ethernet devices and so forth. So there are some simple rules, and that way we keep apples for apples and make sure the measures are okay. If you're measuring an exchange, for example, where you've got predominantly networking equipment, that could be an issue because this does not consider, I mean, it measures the energy, but there is no direct correlation to networking equipment because it looks at number of cores, it looks at storage capacity. So we're looking at standards down the track to make sure we incorporate networking equipment, but that's not available at this point in time. So I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Bob. Just a reminder to all attendees, if there are any further questions, please do submit them now in the GoToWebinar control panel. Next question, Bob, actually is regards to the cheats that you mentioned throughout the presentation. Is any one of the 4 cheats more effective than the other, and perhaps should you start with one over any other?
Sorry, could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned in your presentation there are 4 cheats that businesses can use to help them with their energy efficiency and sustainability. Is there any one of the 4 cheats that are more effective than the other, and should an organisation look at starting with one over the others?
Look, at the end of the day, an audit, because in an audit we do a whole lot of things, and it's a discovery process. So at the end of the day, an audit is a requirement. But before the audit, probably an initial chat to determine, what is the best course. But typically, 9 times out of 10 would be an audit. Now, there are like I said, 2 types of audits. In order to not spend a lot of money, you might want to go for a self-assessment audit. And this is something that I know William Emke is extremely good at and has a number of arrangements and programs in that place. But if you know that you've got problems and you want to deal with them immediately and go into a fully fledged audit, that would certainly be the best way to go forward. And then from there, you can then go through and do what you need to do.
Thank you, Bob. Well, if there are no further questions, that will end our live webinar session for today. So I'd like to say a big thank you to our speaker, Bob, for your time and also your willingness to share your information and experiences today. And also a huge thanks to all who participated and attended. We're glad you could join us, and we certainly hope this session was helpful for you. Just a reminder to all attendees that a recording of this session will be made available within 24 hours via the Green IT Week virtual conference page. Were there any closing comments or remarks, Bob?
No, I just want to thank you very much for this opportunity, Tim. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Look forward to doing more of these, and certainly look forward to even answering more questions. If people have more questions afterwards that they send through you, I'd be more than happy to answer the questions in detail. And I certainly look forward to working with you and more of these presentations in the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Bob. Well, that will conclude our session for today. Just a reminder, if you'd like to have a look at any of the previous live virtual conference presentations that have been delivered throughout Green IT Week, please do check out our homepage at www.greenitweek.org or our dedicated Green IT Week YouTube channel at youtube.com/greenitweek. So thank you again, and please do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.